Good evening, and I, Dr. Lata Suresh, heading the Knowledge Resource Center at IICA, welcome you all for another interesting book talk by Professor Jaideep Prabhu. Professor Prabhu did his BTech from IIT Delhi and PhD from University of South California, UK. He's faculty of marketing in Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, UK. He has written and published many articles in reputed international journals, and he's on the editorial board of leading journals such as Journal of Marketing. I'm not going very detailed profile of Professor Prabhu because he has requested me not to do so, but he has co-authored the Jugaad Innovation, Think Frugal, Be Flexible, and he has been invited by BBC, and let's hear from Dr. Prabhu about his book, Frugal Innovation, How to Do More and Better with Less. In this talk, he will be discussing how the phenomenon of frugal innovation, the creation of faster, better, and cheaper solutions that employ minimal resources can help employ more people creatively and solve some of the big problems of poverty, inequality, and climate change that stalk the planet. He will also discuss the implications for corporates and startups as well as the policy makers. So I would now request Professor Prabhu to kindly discuss about this book, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Please, over
Thank
to
you
you,
so
sir.
much. Thank you so much, Dr. Lata. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you for being here, taking the time. So as Dr. Lata was saying, I'm a professor of marketing. I've spent my career studying innovation. In the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western companies. And then I became interested in innovation in emerging economies like India, where I grew up. And when I started to look at innovation in India, I was struck by how Indian innovators are very good at three things. First, being very frugal, doing more with less. Second, having a very flexible mindset, being able to improvise, a lot of lateral thinking, and so on. And third, many of their solutions seem designed to bring people who are outside the formal economy into the formal economy. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about, what I mean by this kind of frugal innovation. So here we have an example of innovation in a rich country. This is a high-end fridge that will talk to you and you can talk back to via this tablet PC. And for that, you pay about $3,000. So often in Western countries, companies have big budgets. They are pushing the technology frontier, coming up with some new technology. Then they put it into their products to differentiate them, and they charge the customer for it. Now, you may see something like this in India, but you're equally likely to see something like this. So the expensive fridge is $3,000. This clay fridge, MittiCool, is less than $30. I'll tell you more about the Innovator in a second, but it's basically frugal, flexible, and inclusive. Here's another example. This is an incubator from a company like GE. It's a beautiful machine. It has all the bells and whistles, but it's $25,000. And at that price, it's really beyond the reach of most people in countries like India, particularly those in rural areas. The clinics will not be able to afford such a thing. Even if you give it to them, they may not have a technician there. They may not have access to regular electricity. In a situation like that, something like this is very powerful. So the incubator is $25,000. This baby warmer is less than $100. Now it doesn't have all its, it doesn't have an oxygen tent, so it's not an incubator. It's a baby warmer, but it is designed to address a large part of the problem that the incubator is addressing. Problem of infant mortality. When infants are born 1 or 2 weeks prematurely, they cannot maintain their body temperature. In some cases, they may die or be very badly affected. This baby warmer will save them. And interestingly, this baby warmer was not developed by a large company. It was developed by 4 students who were at Stanford taking a course called Design for Extreme Affordability, where the objective of the course was to come up with a working prototype that was 1/100th the cost of the existing solution. And the students came up with this for their course. After they graduated from Stanford, they tested this with mothers and midwives in rural India. They worked, they got venture capital backing. They tested it in the medical hospital in Stanford. And then when they were ready to commercialize, they had a bit of a problem. They did not have a sales force. And at that point, they formed a non-exclusive licensing agreement with GE Healthcare, and GE Healthcare's sales force helped them to take it across different Indian states, but also around the world. So my co-authors and I, we looked at lots of such examples from India and from related emerging markets. And in India, when we asked people how they would describe this kind of frugal, flexible approach, they often use the Hindi word Jugaad. So we wrote a book called Jugaad Innovation, where we defined this as the art of overcoming constraints by improvising an effective solution. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's a good enough solution that uses the limited resources that are available in that context. And after we published the book, people from other countries said, oh, we have something similar in our country, not only in emerging markets, but also in developed countries. And I will talk about frugal innovation in developed countries in a little while. So in the Jugaad book, we looked at lots of examples and we tried to identify some of the principles that were driving this kind of frugal innovation. And these are the 6 principles that we cover in the book. First, these innovators are very good at finding opportunity in adversity. Actually, necessity becomes the mother of invention and their inspiration. Second, they are very good at doing more with less. So they look at what resources they have and use those resources to substitute for resources they don't have. Third, there's a lot of improvisation. The idea is if you cannot climb the mountain, try to find a way around it. Fourth, the solutions are very simple. This helps to economize, but it also helps to ensure easy adoption and maintenance of the solution. Fifth, they include marginal people, not only as consumers, but also part of the solution. And I'll give you examples in a minute. Finally, these people are very passionate about what they're doing. And this is very important because what they're doing is quite hard and they need to persist over a period of time. So here are some of the people we cover in our book. This is Mansukh Bhai. He comes from a village in Gujarat. He has a high school education, comes from a family of potters. In 2001, you may remember there was a very serious earthquake in Gujarat. A lot of people lost their household possessions, including the matkas in which they store water. And he said that one morning he opened the local newspaper and there was a picture of someone's matka that was broken. And the caption read, "Poor man's fridge broken." And that actually gave him the idea to make a poor man's fridge, like you see in front of you. He set up a factory in his village. He trained local women to make these matkas, these MittiCools, and then he even sold them, including on the internet. So, he embodies those 6 principles: getting opportunity from adversity. The earthquake gave him the idea. Doing more with less, using resources he had like water, clay, his own skills. Keeping the solution simple. You can see the design is very simple, doesn't need electricity. A lot of lateral thinking and improvisation, including marginal people like himself, not only as potential consumers and buyers of this fridge, but also training local women from the village to work in the factory where they could earn an extra income. And you can see him on YouTube talking about his inventions. You'll see he's very passionate. So we covered grassroots innovators like this in our book. We also looked at people from cities, social entrepreneurs like Harish Hande from Bangalore, who set up this company called SELCO, solar electric lighting company, to sell solar lighting solutions to people who are outside, the electricity grid, people in urban slums or in the countryside. And he said the best lesson in life he learned was from one of his potential customers, a fruit cart vendor, who told him that 300 rupees a month was too much, but 10 rupees a day was not. And he realized that he had to deliver a solution to people like that who are earning and spending on a daily basis. So if the fruit cart vendor is spending 10 rupees on kerosene every day, how can he offer her solar lighting at 10 rupees? So this is his solution. He comes up, he has identified people like this from those communities. So you can see that those people are part of the solution. He trains this person, people like this, to maintain the batteries, panels, and lights. He worked with a bank to give people like this loans, which he guarantees for 6 months. With the loan, this person sets up shop like you see here. He buys batteries and panels and lights. He charges the batteries during the day, and in the evening he rents them to the fruit cart vendor for 10 rupees. So she does not have to change her behavior. Instead of paying 10 rupees for kerosene, she can buy solar lighting, which is much better for her. She can improve her productivity and earn more. And this person also benefits because after 6 months, he has a credit history and he is in the banking system and he has a business. So you see lots of these examples of social enterprises or entrepreneurs doing very creative things. They come up with very good solutions, but sometimes they fail to scale their solutions. And this is where large organizations come in, not only domestic companies, but also multinationals. So for instance, GE has its largest R&D center in the world in Bengaluru. And there they have been developing a whole host of medical devices and other solutions for the mass of the Indian population. So for instance, ECG machines, they realize they can sell their big machines to the city hospitals, but the big market is in rural India where the clinics will not be able to afford the big machines. And in any case, the doctor usually goes on a day trip from the city to the countryside. So they realized the machine they would have to make for that market would have to be not only highly affordable, but portable. It would have to fit in a doctor's bag. It would have to be battery operated and be very reliable. So they knew it would have to look like this. And then they went one step further and said, let us do Jugaad. So let us, instead of doing everything ourselves, let's see what things we need for this device and then identify if we can find these components off the shelf and just combine them. So if we need a printer, maybe we can use bus ticket printers. That component would be cheaper. We need a keypad, we can use telephone keypads. So by taking off-the-shelf components, they combined them, applied a quality control standard, they had a successful product in India, they introduced something similar in China, and now they are selling them in the West. You will remember Nokia was very powerful in emerging markets like India for many years. They dominated the markets based on very affordable, robust devices like this Nokia phone, which was designed specifically for people in urban slums. Nokia would send people in the late 90s to really understand what people in urban slums wanted from mobile phones, and they developed this phone based on those insights. A highly affordable, robust phone that would have, for instance, a built-in flashlight to help people see in the dark. And that was a killer application for people. At one point, before the iPod came along, this was the best-selling consumer electronics device in the world. And now you have people around the world who have access to mobile phones, and you can offer them various services. So in Kenya, for instance, Vodafone introduced a service called M-Pesa in 2007, which would allow a lady from a village in Kenya to use her basic phone to call her son who's working in the city and earning a regular income. She could not only talk to him, but ask him to send money home, which he could text to her using his basic phone. She could receive that text message on her phone and she could cash that money in the local Kirana shop, which is the M-Pesa agent. So this is frugal financial inclusion, where again, basically Vodafone joined the dots. They took what was already there. People already had mobile phones. They were already texting each other. They had Kirana shops in their village. They combined them to come up with a solution to deliver financial services faster, better, cheaper. Now, because you have so many people in countries like Kenya who, even if they don't have bank accounts, can make micropayments, you can sell them things like solar lighting solutions. The problem that Harish Hande had of 300 rupees a month is too much, 10 rupees a day is not, is solved in Kenya because you can now install these devices in a rural person's hut. They may not have the liquidity to pay for the upfront cost. They may not have a bank loan, but they can pay the upfront cost in micro payments on a weekly basis using M-Pesa. So we see lots of these solutions, and we wrote that Jugaad book about emerging countries in 2012. After that book came out, we saw there was a lot of interest in this idea of frugal innovation in the West for the West. So we started to look at that, my co-author and I, and we realized that in the West, you have a slightly different thing that was going on. You had a group of consumers that was much more actively involved in the economic process. We call them prosumers. They were not passively receiving products and services from companies. They were more actively involved in three movements. One, the sharing economy. Two, the maker movement. and third, the circular economy. So let me talk about some of these. The sharing economy. This is where now you and I can directly trade spare assets, like for instance, a spare room in our house on a digital platform like Airbnb. And this kind of rental sector, digital rental sector, sharing economy sector was pretty small in 2013, but it's expected to grow very big by 2025. How can it grow so fast? Basically, because it's frugal. The business model is asset light. So the CEO of Airbnb says, we are competing with, bricks and mortar physical store chains like Marriott. Marriott, if they want to add 30,000 rooms capacity in a particular year, they will have to physically build it. That takes time, money, resources. We can create that capacity in 2 weeks on our platform. Why? Because we're not creating anything new. We are taking what is already there. People like you and me just have to put our asset on that platform and they can build that capacity. And we see this in other areas like BlaBlaCar, which is a car sharing service, which allows somebody, say, from commuting from, say, Delhi to Chandigarh, they can sell the extra seats in their car to somebody who wants to make that journey, and they can cover their costs. Again, it's asset light, and you can see this kind of exponential growth. So that's the sharing economy. Let me turn to the maker movement. This is probably even more revolutionary. This is where now small teams, sometimes of our students, can do things that only large companies could do 10 or 20 years ago. And not only in software, but also in hardware. This is an example from Cambridge, where I teach. One of our former students, a mature student who was doing a part-time MBA, while he was teaching in the computer science department of the university. Uh, he and his colleagues realized that fewer young people in the UK were applying to study computer science. And even the ones who were applying had never opened any computer to play with it or done any coding. So they said, what if we come up with a very basic computer, the microprocessor you see in his hand? They would have to combine it with memory devices, displays, and so on. They would have to code for it. And it would be so cheap that if they broke it, it wouldn't be a problem. So they thought they would sell a few thousand units. They have sold several million. The first one was $30. They now have a $5 version. And these are being used not only by kids, but also by adults who are combining them with other kinds of devices to make Internet of Things solutions. So for instance, one of my former students, he took the Raspberry Pi, he gave it a cladding, and he branded it. And then he loaded it with the Khan Academy. The Khan Academy is the entire US school curriculum that is available in YouTube form for free. And Prabhu said, well, there are a lot of children around the world who don't have access to the internet. They may not have access to even a PC, but they usually have access to a TV even in their schools. So this can be combined to a TV, and then they would have access to the school curriculum. We carry around very sophisticated computers that are networked in our pockets. This company from UC Berkeley has created, it's called CellScope. They have created a series of medical devices that simply fit into the audio jack of the phone and leverage the phone's capacities. So this is an otoscope here, and this will allow a mother to take very high resolution pictures of the inner ear of her daughter and send the images to a consultant doctor who's somewhere else. This device is a fraction of the cost of the standalone medical device. And of course, it also enables telemedicine. And they have many other such devices like dermoscopes and so on. 3D printers. This 3D printer is less than $200. And at that price, people can potentially afford it in their homes. If you cannot afford it in your home, you can now go to spaces. These are called fab labs or make spaces or tech shops, where you can get access to all kinds of tools, including digital manufacturing tools like 3D printers, laser cutters, circuit board printers. But importantly, you get access to a group of people who are also tinkering, who you can bounce your ideas off and you can learn from. Those students from Stanford I told you about, who are coming up with this baby warmer for their course, they went to a tech shop near Stanford and they were tinkering. They had this idea of a blanket that the mother can use to swaddle the baby, but they realized that that's not enough. You need something that will keep temperature fixed, and they didn't know how to do that. In the tech shop, they met someone who was a former NASA scientist, and he told them about these phase change materials, waxy substances you can put in a pad and you can heat with electricity or hot water, and that will keep temperature fixed for a period of time. And this is a crucial ingredient. Without this, this baby warmer would not work. This is Jane Chen, one of the students from that group with Obama, who, when he was the president, he hosted a maker fair to celebrate these kinds of makers in the US. And you can see why. His idea was today's do it yourself is tomorrow's made in America. He is beginning to see, his policymakers are beginning to see the possibilities of these new types of manufacturing that can maybe revitalize manufacturing in the US, bring into cities these micro factories where you could do more high value add, creative kind of manufacturing. And so, I've told you a little bit about a lot of the entrepreneurs, startups doing frugal innovation. But then the question is, what does this mean for large companies? So we wrote this follow-up book in 2015 about what large companies were doing in the West to really look into frugal innovation. And again, like the previous Jugaad book, we looked at lots of examples and we extracted some principles. So I'm not going to go through all these principles. I'll just talk a bit about some, especially this number 3, which is all about the circular economy and creating sustainable solutions. So an example we cover in our book is this French flooring company. They do flooring for office buildings. They're called Tarket. And in 2010, their CEO set a very ambitious target that by 2020, we'll be a totally circular enterprise. That is, instead of taking materials from nature, making and then selling to consumers who will then dump it, we will reduce, reuse, and recycle all the materials that go into our products. So they realized this is not only a technical problem, technical challenge, it's also a business challenge and a behavioral challenge because they have to move from a transactional relationship with their customers, just selling things to the customer, to a service model where they will have a contract with an office building, say for 5 years. And during that contract, they will provide the service of flooring, but they will retain control of the assets so that they can make the best use of the asset, reducing, reusing, and recycling them. I turn to another principle, the 5th principle, which is co-creating with these prosumers. And here's an example of Ford, the motor company in Detroit. They partnered with Tech Shop in Detroit to enable their engineers to go and tinker, just play for one afternoon every week as part of their job. And initially, they realized this not only improved the morale of their engineers, it also improved their productivity. These engineers were able to generate more high value patents from this process. One final principle, which is working with innovative partners. This is an example from London, UK, where you have big banks like Barclays. They have realized they have lost touch with their retail customers who don't go into bank branches much. And in fact, there are fewer bank branches now. But they know they have a lot of data on our purchases, and they can use that data to analyze patterns and then give recommendations to people on an app on their phone, just like Amazon looks at our purchases and gives us recommendations. So in London, they're surrounded by fintechs that are doing a lot of these innovations very fast and cheap. So they're partnering with them. They have an accelerator there where every 13 weeks, they have 10 top fintech startups that are mentored one afternoon a week by people from the bank. That helps the startups to learn about banking, but it also helps the bank to learn about new technology. And at the end of the 13 weeks, these startups will pitch to a Barclays team that then decides whether to make an investment or not. Let me now conclude and let me talk again about India's place in this world of frugal innovation. So when we wrote our first Jugaad book, which was about the 2000s, you could say that was frugal innovation 1.0, which was being led by emerging markets like India. When we followed up with our second book, which was about the West, you could see that, we could see at least, that the West was also picking up on frugal innovation in a big way. And now we see that India and the West are combining their skills and their markets, and their companies are working together to lead a kind of a new version of this approach to frugal innovation, which is much more global. So my co-author and I, we actually wrote a follow-up book. It was actually an update of our 2015 book, where we specifically looked at new developments in India, which were building on some of the things we wrote about in the West. So we looked at new examples in India where Indian startups and big companies were getting into sharing economy, maker movement, and circular economy. So, for instance, we have a case about Shailaja Rangarajan, who has a company called Rimagined, where she's actually combining all these elements of a digital platform for sharing with the maker movement and with the circular economy. So basically, she has a line of products that she creates based on recycled materials, actually upcycling waste materials, waste textiles, waste plastics, etc. She works with craftswomen from rural India, which are very skilled at making these things. She gives them design ideas, works with them, co-creates these solutions, and then she sells them on a digital platform to people from particularly urban areas who would like to buy these very interesting home accessories, clothing products, etc. Another case we cover is of Makers Asylum. This is a maker space in Mumbai, which is also spread to some other cities, where they offer courses, training students from around the world in how to use these new tools to manufacture solutions for people in cities like Mumbai. They were doing these training courses in person when the pandemic hit, COVID, and then they had to pivot very quickly to do something with their space and that time. They decided they would start working on making in their factory, in their micro factory, in the maker space, PPE, personal protective equipment, like these visors you see them wearing and making. So initially they started to do this and they got a positive feedback from hospitals in Mumbai. They set a pretty ambitious target because there was a huge need. And then they realized they would need to work with other maker spaces across India. So they started sharing their videos about how to design and make these with several other maker spaces in India. Soon they had 42 maker spaces that formed an association called the M19 Collective. And in a few weeks, they produced and distributed over 1 million face shields to frontline staff like policemen and nurses and security people and so on. So I would just like to conclude by saying that this kind of innovation, frugal innovation, offers many opportunities for Indian companies. We know that India and Indian companies need to boost innovation, but they don't need to do that simply by spending on R&D. Of course, they can spend more on R&D, but they can also leapfrog the West. They don't need to reinvent a 20th century model of innovation. They can go straight to a faster, better, cheaper 21st century model. And we know that there's a big focus on Make in India. So frugal innovation poses some questions for companies in India. What to make? I would say, lots of these kinds of frugal solutions that can be made often using ubiquitous tools that we have now. Things like you can have in a maker's asylum. Who to make for? There's a very vast internal market in India, particularly of relatively low income people living in urban slums, small towns, the countryside. That is a huge untapped market opportunity for frugal solutions. How to make using some of the techniques I've just talked about, some of the principles I've talked about of Jugaad innovation and frugal innovation. I just want to end with the implications for policymakers. So my previous books were all about the private sector and frugal innovation in the private sector. And whenever I presented, I gave talks like this one to people, they would always say, okay, these are very interesting things in the private sector. What does this mean for the government? How can the government do frugal innovation, or how should the government have policies that support it? So I thought a lot about it, and I've just published this book, which is all about the role of the government in supporting and also adopting some of these frugal innovations to do its own work. And I think there are many implications that I explore in this book for policymakers, vis-a-vis new technologies, vis-a-vis frugal innovation, both as an opportunity for government, but also in the economy. So one of the things I cover in this new book is regulation. And I argue that regulators in countries like India or the UK should really engage early and proactively when there are new opportunities. So for instance, I look at not only financial inclusion in places like Kenya and India, but I also look at things like autonomous vehicles. So in the UK, we see that two government departments, the Department for Transport and the Department for Business, have partnered to engage very early with the whole ecosystem of players that will operate in autonomous vehicles, from the car companies, big and small, to the insurance companies, software, telecoms companies, lawyers, and so on, universities where research is happening. They have some seed money to encourage collaboration for testing of new technologies. They also have regulations about how you can test on public roads, what data you have to collect and report on. And this is the idea of having regulatory sandboxes where you can try out experiments with new technologies and new players, but where if something goes wrong, you don't have systemic consequences. So you can manage risk. And you see that happening in the UK, for instance, in fintech, where the central bank has created a regulatory sandbox where fintech startups with some new technologies for banking can get access to real consumers, but in a kind of controlled way. So if something goes wrong, there are not systemic consequences. So that's regulating the economy. I also look at how policymakers can cultivate the economy. And again, I look at how they should engage early and proactively to do industrial strategy. And I look at, for instance, again, autonomous vehicles, as I described, by having few pots of money that can encourage lots of different players to come together to do testing and to grow that sector faster. And the principle there is that I argue that the state should steer and not row. They should coordinate the activities of others, but they should resist the temptation to try and do everything themselves. And this requires the state itself to be innovative. The state has to be innovative within. It has to co-create with citizens and businesses. It has to engage and iterate with various partners in experiments. So let me end my talk by saying that, based on my work over the last few years, I really believe the world needs this kind of frugal, flexible, and inclusive innovation. I think Indian companies can gain by engaging with Western counterparts and so on. And I also think policymakers can work with firms to improve lives everywhere. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now and be very happy to take any questions or to have a discussion.
Jaideep, that was a wonderful session, and regarding doing more with less. And you have also quoted examples from India and abroad. See, Jugaad Innovation was the first book that I read, and that was the book that inspired me to invite you for this session. And although I have one question, if you can permit me. See, Jugaad gives us quick outcome, but not necessarily gives us a long-term solution. Further, being reactive and non-comprehensive, it overlooks larger problems. It also creates problems of efficiency and effectiveness of an existing system. Most of the innovations cited for arguing Jugaad as an innovation methodology have never been tried at the higher scale. It is not known for sure whether these problems will remain affordable when they are scaled up and replicated in any organized manner. They also not been tested for convenience in use and long-term durability. So in such a case, it is premature to suggest Jugaad as an alternative to Western methods of R&D that are solely based on the examples you quoted. There is no denying the fact that there are many innovations that took place in our country, which may fit the use of the word frugal innovation. However, are they exemplary achievement for a country of 1.25 billion? Don't you think India needs explosion of innovative solutions at grassroots?
Yes. So brilliant questions, Dr. Lata. I completely agree with you. You cannot grow an economy and sustain an economy on Jugaad. But it is an aspect of the innovation ecosystem. So how I think about it is that, to have innovation, there are some stages in the whole process. And usually what we say is that, you have an early stage of the innovative process where you are experimenting, you are playing around, shall we say, you are improvising, you are developing not perfect solutions, you are developing prototypes, you are developing something that kind of works, which you will then test. And I would say that is where Jugaad actually works very well. Whether it's in India or in the West, whether it's in scientific labs or it's in large corporate labs, there is a process in the early stages which is messy. You are trying to come up with some solution. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you cannot stop there. Of course, if you want to commercialize and scale, you have to then take that messy improvised solution and figure out a systematic way to make it at scale, to make it affordable, to make it of quality, to then promote it to people. And that is probably where Jugaad is less successful and could, in fact, have a negative effect, because you may then cut corners and so on. And then I would say it's not so much a methodology at that point, it's a mindset. Because even with doing proper process, quality control, etc., you may then also think from a Jugaad mindset of how can we do this faster, better, cheaper. So it's not so much a methodology at that point. You're still trying to achieve quality control, you're still trying to achieve scale, you're trying to achieve replicability, you're trying to achieve sustainability. But the question is, can you do all that without burning time and money? And so that's when Jugaad can be helpful. But I think you need to combine the two. So it is a part of a toolkit for any company, to be able to do both systematic R&D, to be able to do process control, to be able to scale. But I would say they should not forget that there is a kind of innate ability of Indians and people, I think, around the world to also be able to do things faster, better, cheaper. So it's a complementary tool. It's not certainly by any means an exclusive tool. And of course, it can be misused like any tool or used for good purposes.
That was great. And I also know one Mr. Santosh Otswal, who has invented a mobile phone adaptation that triggers irrigation pumps remotely. It is saving water in India and helping more than 10,000 farmers. And that is how innovation is working there also. You are right.
Yes, yes, and increasingly, many of these digital tools which are available to all of us, can be used to develop in a Jugaad way. So, if you're doing Jugaad with poor inputs, poor quality inputs, then you'll have a poor quality output, even if the idea is ingenious. But if you're doing Jugaad with quality, reliable inputs, for instance, if you're using mobile phones and 5G and so on, then you can come up with a solution that is faster, cheaper, better, but of a good quality because it's using reliable inputs. So the example you have given is just one of many that
Correct.
now we can see many Indians applying. So your point about, yes, grassroots people, ordinary people can now create these solutions and do it at a level of a pretty good quality and can also potentially scale it with limited resources. And of course, that can have a life changing and productivity enhancing impact on a large number of Indians. Um, yeah, so I would completely agree. And I gave the example of M-Pesa. Actually, Vodafone saw that people were already doing their own Jugaad in Kenya. They were already exchanging minutes with each other as a form of currency in a actually kind of illegal way, makeshift way. Then they took that idea and they applied a quality control standard. They worked with the central bank to make sure that it was a robust platform, that it was complying with regulations, especially on money laundering, and then they created a system. So the Jugaad bit was the front end, and then they made it in a kind of a system.
Great. So I would like to take questions from the participants as well. Anybody? Please unmute your mic and you may chat with Professor Prabhu. I think you are very clear in your talk, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And I'll be inviting you again for one more session soon, and would request you to accept the same as
It
you
will be
did.
my pleasure, Dr. Lata. It was very good to meet you today and present some ideas and have this discussion. And I'll be very happy to continue the conversation and follow up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And really, it was very interesting. And thanks to all the participants who could able to join. Thank you so much, Professor
Thank
Prabhu.
you.
So thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening. Bye.
Good evening. Good evening. Bye.